the sage of Proverbs is giving us alternatives, the way of wisdom or the way of folly. And he says, choose the path of wisdom, choose the path of life, choose the path of joy. Don't choose the path of folly. Don't choose the path of self-indulgence. So here's a question. Is acting in an unwise way sinful? That's an important question.
Welcome to Stewardology, a podcast where two worlds collide. In this show, financial advisor Tim Russell and Pastor Drew Gysi are joined by me, producer Tyler Rutherford, to explore the intersection of financial stewardship and theology. Their unique perspectives help Christians and churches understand and apply a biblical framework for everyday financial decisions so Christians everywhere can grow in their walk with Christ through biblical stewardship. Before we get started, we just wanted you to know that the topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investment and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities and advisory services are offered through Genius Wealth Management, member FINRA, and SIPC. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Tim Russell, Drew Gysi, and Tyler Rutherford.
Welcome to the Stewardology Podcast. My name is Tim Russell, and I'm here with my co-host Tyler Rutherford.
Howdy.
And our fellow co-host Drew Gysi is out today. Today we're going to be tackling a topic of growing interest and growing concern across the nation, and we're tackling it today for a very important reason. In less than a week, the Super Bowl is taking place, and while we will not be mentioning particular teams or rooting for one thing or another because it's technically about to be the playoff season while we're recording this, we do want to take this time to have a discussion with you about what we should think as a biblical steward about the topic of sports betting, sports gambling, and its rise and potential problems that it can create along the way.
Yeah, Tim, I was going to ask you who you think is going to win the Super Bowl, but it's a little hard that right now we actually don't know who's even in the playoffs. But I guess if we guess the right team, it'd be pretty impressive at this point.
Yeah,
right?
It would be.
Well, so there's a lot of people involved in sports betting, and as you are watching the Super Bowl or even going through your social media feed as we are coming up on the big day, you're going to notice there's a lot of advertisements for different sports books out there, people that are advertising sports betting. And Tim, I think you've mentioned in your notes that the advertising budget for sports betting seems to have hit a big peak a couple years ago in 2021. It was a couple $2 billion.
$2 billion in sports betting advertisement.
That's crazy.
So you don't advertise to the tune of $2 billion unless you think that there's some multiple of that available in terms of revenue and profit for your business. That's wild.
Yeah, you got to be making a lot of money. I mean, there's TV advertising, that's expensive. And there's sportsbook advertising during the Super Bowl. And those budgets are massive just to advertise during the Super Bowl. But like you said, it's got to be making a lot of money. There's a lot of people involved in sports betting. I did some research coming into this episode. 20 to 22% of U.S. adults reported betting on sports in the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. That's 1 in 5.
Yeah.
More than 1 in 5 people. Globally, 26% of the population are involved in gambling. So it's 1 in 4. Gambling is a big industry. And I'm a younger guy, and it wasn't too long ago that I was in college, living the college life. So I was like, well, how is this impacting young people? Because I've noticed that in my circle of friends, surprisingly, there's a good amount of people that have dabbled in this. So I did some research there. 58% of college students estimated, so this is ages 18 to 22, reported sports betting activity at some point during their 4 years in college. And that number jumps to 65% if they lived on campus.
Wow.
So peer pressure, right?
Wow.
It's nuts. And get this, if this didn't blow your mind, this kind of boils my blood a little bit, but 20%, 1 in 5 of college students have used financial aid to finance their gambling at some point during their college years.
Wow. That's remarkable.
Tim, you found some research on the sentiment of sports betting in America. What'd you find?
Well, so the Pew Research put out a study. This actually came out October 2nd of 2025, and it shows that there's across the spectrum of the American society, there is a shift from the last time they did this study in 2022 to 2025. There's a shift in the attitudes that Americans have about sports betting. So the question is, how many people think sports betting is a bad thing for society? Just that's the question. Is sports betting bad for society? In 2022, 34% of adults said yes. Fast forward just 2 years, 3 years actually, and it's 43% said it was a bad thing.
Wow.
So from 34 to 43. Among men, that jumped from 35 to 45, women 33 to 40. And you can go to our website and see this. One thing that I thought was the most remarkable was that young people from 18 to 29 had a substantial jump from 23% in 2022 said it was a bad thing to 41% as of this year. Said it was a bad thing. That is a huge difference. Among white, it was 36 to 46. From blacks, it was from 22 to 31. Hispanics was actually 29 to 37. Again, I'm not going to go and bore you with the whole thing. You're probably saying too late. Interestingly, there's an income differential. How do people of different income feel about sports betting? It may not surprise you that the higher up your income you are, the more likely you are to say it's a bad idea. The lower you are on the income spectrum, the more likely you are to say it's not a bad thing for society. So specifically, we have 28% of low-income people saying it was bad in 2022, compared to now 36%. So we are seeing a shift. Even the low income is starting to realize it's not as good as it's cracked up to be. So I think that's interesting. Politically, here's another one that's interesting. Those on the political spectrum have seen a shift. Republicans, or those who lean Republican, have seen very little change. They were 38% thought it was a bad to 43%. So a shift, but not a huge shift. Among Democrats, it was much bigger. In fact, Democrats and Republicans, as of today, both think that sports betting is not good for society. At least 43% of them think it's not good for society. Before, it was, where's the number? 31%. So that is a 12% jump in 4 years on the Democratic side. So across political spectrums, there is more and more consensus that sports betting is not necessarily a net positive for society. Interesting.
What I found really interesting about this chart is that it actually compares sports bettors to non-sports bettors, and both of them, even sports bettors, all kind of moved right on the spectrum and said, hey, this is not a good thing for society. It's crazy.
Might be good for me, but not for society at large. Too many knuckleheads out there.
It's a problem for them, not for me. I can stop when I want. Oh, man. But so young adults, too, I mean, I talked about this earlier. They're kind of, it seems to be that they are the most exposed to this. You know, they're vulnerable men. We like to win. We like to compete. And even that group, like you mentioned earlier, are moving drastically to the side of the spectrum that says, hey, this is an issue. But, man, every single demographic, every single category of people here said that, hey, this is a bad thing. They're moving towards that direction. This is a bad thing.
Go to our show notes. You can see the link. You can go right to the Pew Research website page, which shows this and more information. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Yeah, certainly. So the title of this episode is Sports Betting is Booming, but at what cost? So I think it'd be interesting to talk about the effects that sports betting, that gambling is having on people. And there's different categories here. You know, individually there's issues. In a family situation, there's issues. But let's talk about effects on the individual first.
Yeah.
What kind of effects does it have?
Yeah, well, so sports betting is, or can be, very addictive. And in that way, it can certainly cause those with mental health issues to have more symptomatic problems, either with the addiction or with other psychoses that may be going on. So specifically, you might start with like a $10 bet. But in order to get the same dopamine, right, you then have to risk $20 and $50 and $100 to get the same kind of dopamine spike. There's a mental health, there's a brain chemistry thing going on as we're betting. As we're putting $10 at risk, we're either winning or losing. In order to get that same kind of emotional high, you need to put even more capital at risk. So then you start obsessing over your next bet. You feel the need to bet more than you can really afford to. In some cases, they're like losses are in the tens of thousands, 20s of thousands of dollars, and they keep on persisting with the obsession in your mind, in your heart. Obviously, this kind of thing is seriously problematic. And if I could just put a side note here, one of the ways that I'm most troubled about this is how the apps themselves are gamifying gambling. They're making it like the kind of video game on your phone where, you get rewards and incentives and badges for the more that you do, the more that you play, the more that you win, the more that you bet, the more you can achieve different levels and achievements and statuses within each of these apps. That in and of itself, if it wasn't just that gambling itself is addictive, adding the gamification of gambling adds an additional element of risk to or impact to what sports betting can do.
Yeah, I think what's crazy too is as they're starting to feel like they need to bet more to get this dopamine rush, to get this high, you might realize I don't have the cash that I need to actually front the money for this wager. So what I'm going to do is use a credit card. And surprisingly, a lot of these companies will let you use a credit card to wager bets. The problem with that is now you're going into consumer debt, high interest consumer debt, to bet on things, right? So what's worse than losing money you have? Losing money you don't have.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, and having to pay the debt and the interests on the debt now for the next number of years. That's
Holy
crazy.
cow.
So that creates some financial distress. So we're talking about the mental health issues, addiction issues, financial distress. There's also physical health problems that's involved. How many times have you heard stories of individuals who are literally at a slot machine for like 24 hours and has to, be taken out because they're unable to walk out under their own strength or things of that nature. Maybe if you're not around gambling establishments, you don't hear stories like that, but it's a real thing. We see that in lots of different areas. You could argue that that's actually a symptom of the mental health crisis, and you're probably right there. There's certainly a mental health issue possibly that's going on, but there is an impact on one's physical health, not just mental health. The physical and the mental are tied together.
Yeah, and substance abuse is a big part of that too. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
If you're losing money hand over fist, it's going to drive you to maybe depression and things like that. And maybe you get involved in alcohol or other things just to numb the pain of feeling like I lost all this money, I'm a failure. And what's really interesting too is the most dramatic end, I think, to this effect on the individual is suicide.
Yeah.
There was an instance a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it happens more, where this one guy was on an app, one of these like day trading apps that you can just download and open, Robinhood.
Yeah.
And his app showed that he was like under zero by like $750,000 or something like that. And he killed himself over this. And there was a lawsuit that happened between his family and the app. But man, like he lost a lot of money, and that drove him to suicide. And that's devastating. That's devastating. And I know Robinhood is a little different than these sportsbook apps, but I do want to clarify though, like people do gamble. I'm going to use gamble in air quotes on apps like Robinhood, on these like penny stocks or options or things that are on there.
So this is maybe a side conversation, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. There is fundamentally a difference between investing money in a company that makes a product and a service and provides value to society versus wagering on an outcome of a sports event. side bets and prop bets and all of the things that go along with that. You're not actually investing money that makes the world a better place. You're simply wagering on outcomes. So it's fundamentally a different thing. Yeah. However, people can approach investing with a gambling mindset. And that's actually one of the things that, from my perspective, creates a behavioral trend that if you take this into investing, you can start doing investing wrong. Start investing like it's a game, like it's a way of gambling. You might be able to start betting on the outcome of a Fed rate cut announcement, or how many times the Fed says inflation in its statement, or whatever word they want. These are called prop bets. Now, we've been talking about Robinhood. That was the app in particular. I just heard Robinhood has now rolled out a predictions market that individuals can now wager on. So it is involved. It's a little bit more of blurring the lines between investing and gambling within Robinhood. And I have to say, personally, in my 401k, I've purchased Robinhood. It's been an amazing investment for me. When I sold, over half of my position, I was up 1,400%.
Holy cow.
Which is pretty wild. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, how much longer? I don't like that. That's concerning to me, because that's enslaving people in a particular kind of lifestyle and thing that, to me, is not what I want my capital to be accomplishing. So that I have to go back to the drawing board, kind of refigure what do I want to do with this investment? Should I pull the plug? And that's something I'm still kind of working through right now.
That's interesting. Well, as you look at the effects on the individual, like the question is, the title of this episode is Sports Betting is Booming, but at what cost? We just looked, there's some very heavy costs when it comes to the individual. And as we see, that's going to leak over into the family. What's going to happen if you're struggling with mental illness and depression or substance abuse, right? It's going to have an impact on your relationships. So divorce rates probably going to climb. Yep. This is a really interesting one. University of Oregon came out with this number. It said when sports gambling was legalized, the effect of NFL home team upset losses on intimate partner violence increases by around 10%.
That's nuts.
Isn't that crazy?
That's nuts.
So just domestic violence goes up when more gambling is involved, and you lose a bet and now you're angry.
How many times have you seen an individual upset when their team loses? Mm-hmm. So you have the emotional loss that you feel when your team loses. Add on top of that a financial loss. If you bet on the outcome of that game, that could be a problem. However, I wonder, would it be an opposite thing? So what if you put money that your team loses? That way it's a win-win, right? If they win, then you win. And if they lose, you still win. That way it doesn't feel so bad. Maybe that can help reduce domestic violence. I'm not recommending gambling. Just as a thought.
Let's start another podcast on sports. No, we're not. We're not doing that. Oh, man. But anyway, when you add burdens like anxiety and stress and depression onto what is already difficult, like marriage, relationships, like these things are hard. They take work to maintain, and it's a good thing. But when you add these unnecessary stresses and pressures, it doesn't end well. It just creates this, it can create catastrophic ends. We don't want to do this, but obviously this is going to have an effect on society at large and the economy. What are some of the things we have in there?
Yeah. So, public health crisis is obviously one of the first ones that comes to mind when we have people doing self-harm or harm to others because of adverse outcomes from their wagers. That's certainly an issue, or due to addictive behavior, substance abuse, all connected with the gambling lifestyle. Those are going to have some pretty significant health crises. Then you also have the crime rates. We talked about violent crime. You could potentially also talk about trying to cover debts through resorting to crime, extortion, embezzling. So you're stealing funds from an employer or from some other organization to be able to cover your debts. There certainly have been anecdotal stories about that over the last number of years. So we have increased crimes. We have criminal corruption within the sport itself. So if you're throwing a match, if you're wagering on something and then manipulating an individual to throw the match, to throw the fight, to lose the game, or to do something to win a prop bet. Like those kind of things are illegal activities, and it loses the integrity of the sport. So there is erosion of sports integrity. And then finally, obviously, there are regulatory challenges, because whenever we get into something like this, right, we're getting into a sports betting scenario and we're looking at the negative outcomes. Well, what do you do when there are negative outcomes? Regulate. You regulate. You don't regulate good outcomes. You regulate bad outcomes. So you're going to have more regulation, more involvement for federal oversight, more taxes, more bureaucracy and red tape, which I hate. I don't like the industry itself, but I also hate bureaucracy. So it's kind of like getting two of my least favorite things involved together. And, I don't know. It's
Pick
kind
your
of crazy.
poison.
Yeah.
That's tough. Well, there's impact on consumers too, right? So 55% of U.S. citizens, U.S. consumers participated in some kind of gambling over the last 12 months.
That's
Not just
wild.
sports betting,
Yeah.
but like all kinds of gambling. And when I think when you're involved in gambling and you're playing the game or whatever it is you're doing, you're going to spend more money as you maybe you lose. You're going to be spending more money putting it in. Even if you win, you're going to say, I want to chase that rush again. I'm going to put more money into this thing, and you're going to create impulse betting, impulse gamblers, and you're going to put more money into it. Mm-hmm. And that's less money that you're saving, less money that you're putting into your family. More addiction. Addiction's going to rise. I think U.S. helpline calls jumped 45% in 2023. That's crazy. It's a lot of people.
So specifically, those are addiction helpline calls.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, gambling addiction. And then, like we said, we're looking at some of the target demographics for some of these things. Young men are really like the hot spot for gambling, for sports betting companies and these softwares and apps. It's crazy. So let's jump into this question. Is it good? Is sports betting, gambling good for society and people?
Yeah, clearly the answer is no.
Right.
I would argue the answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no. Mm-hmm. And then here's the caveat. The proposition market is information. I don't like that people waste money and get involved in this behavior, but I will tell you that I actually do pay attention to the prop markets for political outcomes and political elections. Interestingly, for some reason, these markets have actually been better at predicting election outcomes than polls are.
Really?
Actually asking people who they're going to vote for and then extrapolating who's going to win the election is less predictive than actually looking at the wagering markets. So Real Politics actually tracks that during presidential election cycles and other political elections, and they'll show who's got like the momentum in the prop betting world. So look, I'm not saying it's good for society, but I'm saying it's interesting information. And anecdotally, I've heard that the CIA actually, and this is where we get our tinfoil hat on. Maybe the CIA is involved in this, because what's going on? They have found that looking at what people actually do with their money in gambling is a better prediction than intel, than their own intel can be at times about whether or not Russia is going to invade Ukraine, or whatever is going to happen. For whatever reason, there's this this knowledge that's on a grassroots level that kind of trickles up through the gambling or this predictions market kind of thing. So while I say it's not good for society from the individual perspective, from a financial perspective, I also say it's information, and that information is interesting, and I could live without the information. But that's something that I see as, that's definitely, that to me is something that I find compelling, not to participate in, but to pay attention to.
Yeah. So there's another question that we had on here, but I'm going to hold it until after we ask the first question. So somebody might say, hey, it's just harmless fun. I have money in my budget for it. Can it just be harmless fun? But I want to answer that question after we discuss, what does the Bible have to say? Is there a biblical prohibition against gambling and therefore sports betting. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, I've read the Bible numerous times. I've done some research, some reading on the topic, and the way I look at it is that there are no real clear explicit prohibitions. Thou shalt not gamble. Thou shalt not go to casinos. So if we just stop there, we say, well, then it's free game. I'm free in Christ. I have my Christian liberty. I can gamble. I can play the lottery. I can do whatever. But if we take it a couple steps further, and I think it's necessary that we do that as Christians, to think about what are the implicit statements that the Word of God has to say that are connected to the idea, the lifestyle, and the mentality behind gambling. Well, then it becomes a much clearer story. That gambling in and of itself is problematic for the believer because we're looking for the outcome of an event to provide for our needs rather than for God to be the provider of our needs. We're playing with fate. We're not practicing principles of faith or reliance on God and His sovereignty. We're focusing on what we can get out of gambling, our skill in predicting a particular future outcome. Scripture admonishes us to work diligently, whereas gambling tells us that we should seek a quick fix, a quick way of getting rich. If you make the right kind of prop bet, you could score big and you don't have to work as much. Therefore, the purpose of life, according to gambling, is leisure, pleasure, success. Whereas the Christian explanation of the purpose of life is work hard, serve others, love Jesus, achieve success. Like there's the sweat of the brow that's part of the process. Now, a gambler might say, "Well, hey, look, there's sweat of the brow when you're at the casino and you're sweating it out when you're losing or you're having a bad string of luck." Right there, though, we just dealt with the idea of luck. Now, the biblical Christians can say, what is luck? The luck is really the sovereign outworking of God's plan in this world. Luck is not really luck. Luck is God being God and allowing stuff to happen when and how He wants it to happen. However, I would argue in this particular scenario that it's not one that's operated out of faith. You're operating out of a fatality, like the fates are going to determine the future. It's a fatalism. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. It's a fatalistic way of looking at life in the world, not a way of operating out of faith. So Scripture admonishes us to work. We talked about that. No get-rich-quick schemes. The Bible commands and warns us not to be covetousness, not to steal, but to work hard so we have something to lend or something to give to others. Larry Burkett, in his book Money Matters, talks about, practically speaking, gambling often targets those who can least afford to lose money, becoming an addiction that can devastate a family. It's at page 126 of that book. We also see that gambling is seen as a violation of Jesus' command to love God and your neighbor because it undermines the responsibility of stewardship and of stewarding the resources that we've been entrusted with. So it's not properly loving God and loving your neighbor when you're engaged in gambling, because remember, there is a side to each wager. There's a winner and a loser. Remember, these organizations are not putting $2 billion in advertising if they don't think there's some multiple of that they're going to get out of your and everyone else's pocket. So please be wise about this. It may not be explicitly, thou shalt not go on FanDuel and gamble on tonight's game. But it is saying, have faith, work hard, and the attitudes and philosophies that govern and drive people towards sports betting is not consistent with a Christian worldview. Therefore, I would argue the Christian should not engage in a system that even if you don't get addicted to it, even if it never becomes a problem for you, is a problem for thousands or millions of your neighbors who are going and being enslaved, having their money taken from them because they're making foolish bets. Again, part of that's an economic lesson, live and learn, but I don't like the predatory aspect of casinos and of sports betting companies.
Yeah. I thought this was interesting. Here are some of the sinful components or behaviors that often accompany gambling. Now, this isn't to say that gambling in of itself as a category is a sin, but here are some of the things that fall under that category that are certainly sinful. Greed, irresponsibility, covetousness, lack of trust in God, i.e. I'm putting my faith and trust in something else, whether it be chance or fate, right? All these things. We're exploiting others, as you just mentioned. Like we're buying into this system that is enslaving people. Laziness, Rick, because I'm just hoping that this one little bet will bring me money that I don't have to go work for. And at the end of the day, it's compulsion. The Bible does not give us license to just act impulsively and compulsively. It wants us to plan, to think, right? To look ahead, foresee the danger, to hide himself, to plan, to think through those things. So yeah, let's go back to that question. I think it's easier to answer now. Can I just be like a casual gambler? If it's not a problem for me, can I just have it be harmless fun? I personally would lean towards no. And I don't want to create a legalistic category out of it, but I would personally avoid it altogether.
In the book of Proverbs, the sage of Proverbs is giving us alternatives, the way of wisdom or the way of folly. And he says, choose the path of wisdom, choose the path of life, choose the path of joy. Don't choose the path of folly. Don't choose the path of selfishness. Don't choose the path of self-indulgence. So here's a question. Is acting in an unwise way sinful? That's an important question.
I was just thinking about that this morning.
Is acting in unwise ways. Mm-hmm. It's not just a lack of wisdom. It's acting in an explicitly not wise way. Yeah. Is that sinful? I think that what Proverbs is telling us is that yes, when you knowingly choose the way of folly, you choose the path of death. You choose to live not in accordance with the way God made the world to work best. And therefore, in that, you are acting in sin. Mm-hmm. Now, you can apply this to a lot of different areas. You can apply this to food. Well, should you eat that Twinkie? Or should you not? Because is it wise for you to eat it, or is it unwise for you to eat it? So, I do think that there probably should be a little bit of modification of how strongly I stress that, because not everything has the same significance. Going to a bar and hanging out with a woman who is not your wife is unwise and it's sinful. There's also a certain level of significance that has to you. Eating a Twinkie when you're generally healthy and your lifestyle otherwise is good and you're not overweight, one and not many, is probably unwise. But at the end of the day, it's not like that, not going to break the world. Yeah. Okay, so we also want to say acting in an explicitly unwise way, the degree or the amount of problematicness of that or sinfulness of that may be determined by how serious the negative outcomes are for that thing. Again, adultery, you're flirting with adultery versus you're healthy, you're fit, you don't overeat, and you just ate a Twinkie. My wife would tell me that's a sin, but I would argue it's probably in the totality of one's life, it's probably not. It's okay because it's within broader perspective and proportions and appropriateness within one's life. Because that in and of itself isn't going to damn one's soul to hell. However, like messing around with your wife and acting in an unfaithful way is certainly indicating a certain lifestyle and way of thinking that is far more indicative of a heart bent away from God, a bent towards yourself, and not in submission to Him, right? So there's a difference. So let's come back to sports betting. I argue sports betting is explicitly acting unwisely. And therefore, in some degree, to some extent, there is sin involved or sin at risk. And I would argue that we should care about the overall societal impact of it by participating in it at all. We do have an impact in broader society. So I would urge the believer to simply not participate. Am I going to call you a sinner because you put $5 on the outcome of Sunday's game? No, I'm not going to do that. However, I think that's between you and God. You gotta wrestle with that to see what is it that you believe. What is God convicting you of, and act according to your conscience. I don't want to bind your conscience, but I do want to inform your conscience. How should you think and act and live with regard to sports betting? Please avoid.
And I think it's important to take a step back. Like if you've been getting involved with sports betting or whatever it is, step back for a second, take a deep breath and ask yourself why.
Yeah.
What is the why here? And really be honest with yourself, because quite frankly, your motivation for getting into sports betting might be the very sin that's causing you to act in this way. For example, if my why for sports betting is I need to make as much money with as little effort as possible. Laziness, perhaps? Possibly, probably. Think about your why and what intentions is that leading you down to get to this point where you're putting money on the line for things that might not be that important. And also think about, like, as a culture, Tim, this is kind of getting offline a little bit, but it's like we're very overstimulated as a culture. We like our social media, we like our scrolling, and we like flashy ads and TV shows where our minds are just going. Like, if sitting down and watching a football game just isn't enough anymore to relax, and instead I need to have something on the line, like I need to be risking money just to have that mental stimulation, that's also a problem. We need to slow down. A few episodes ago, we talked about slowing down and how that's a very healthy thing. This might be one of these instances where we just need to take a step back, take a deep breath, and stop wagering money to get that dopamine hit, to get that risk. Just chill for a second.
Yeah, so in conclusion, I think as a steward, we're called to guard our hearts against greed and covetousness. Protect our households from practices that quietly reshape habits and desires. We need to be concerned how our spending fuels systems that harm others. And we need to choose restraint where culture celebrates excess.
That's good.
So the application is simple but challenging. Choose wisdom over hedonistic pleasures and pursuits that dishonor God. Ephesians 4:28 is probably a good verse for us to land the plane on right now for this episode. It says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." I love this verse. I know that, stealing is not the same as gambling, but it's the idea of getting something for nothing that you go to gambling to do. Rather than doing that thing, work hard. Labor, work with your hands so that you will have money that you need and more than what you need so you can supply for the needs of others. I think that is a great way of changing our perspective about worldview, work, and life to bless the world and bless your family.
Amen, Tim. Love that Bible verse. Well, hey, thank you for joining us. And until next time, I want to leave you with something. If you're concerned about losing money on your next bet, I got a tactic for you that will ensure that you don't lose money that you either do have or don't have. You won't go into debt and you won't lose your money. It's one word. Don't.
Just don't.
Just don't. We'll see you next week. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Stewardology Podcast, where financial stewardship and theology meet. We'd like to help you take your next steps in biblical financial stewardship. Subscribe in your podcast provider to get the newest episode delivered to you every week. Leave a 5-star rating and review to help new listeners find the show. Take advantage of your free personal stewardship review at stewardologypodcast.com/review. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website at stewardologypodcast.com for tons of free resources and hundreds of free episodes. You can also leave episode ideas at stewardologypodcast.com/idea. Remember, Psalm 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. See you next week.